Today I'm going to show you how to remove and install your brakes onto your Juice bike. You're going to be needing your tri-Allen tool. You're going to be using the 5mm and 4mm side. If you do have one of these, this is a 5mm L Allen wrench. You can use this. It might make it a little easier when you do have to remove some of the bolts and reinstall them, but this is optional. It just makes it a little bit easier. Also, you will need a 3mm Allen tool for your front fork when we do the front brake. Pair of needle nose pliers, some zip ties, some side cutters or scissors, and also some isopropyl alcohol. Before we start, it's always a good idea to turn your bike off and then remove your battery. Turn your battery off. All right, we're going to start with the front brake here. I recommend starting out by removing any of the cable management. So if you have like these little noodle pieces right here holding your cables together, take them off. And also, if you have any zip ties, you're also going to cut those. So sometimes some of the bikes will have zip ties here also, so you're going to carefully cut those. This one has one down here, so make sure you don't cut into any of the cables or lines. And get these all removed. And here is going to be your hose, your brake hose for your front line right there. And then also we're going to be looking for, off of your brake here is going to be your motor cutoff sensor. You're going to disconnect that also, so carefully grab it by both ends here and pull. If your bike has this style of connector, it's a screw-on connector, you don't want to be pulling it apart. You're going to actually have to unscrew this and then pull it apart. All right, you're going to take your 3mm Allen and you're going to find this right here, your guide on your fork here, and you're going to loosen this up. Pull it out, and you don't have to take it all the way off, just enough to pull the cable out of there. All right, now you're going to take your tri-Allen tool, find the 5mm side, and we're going to come over here to the caliper. So you got two bolts right here. You're going to loosen these up. And sometimes this is where I find, if you do have one of these L Allen wrenches, makes it a little easier. You can put it on this side and you can get it off a little faster. But if you don't have one of these, it's not a problem. You can still use your tri tool. I just find this a little faster doing it this way. So you need to get these all loose and carefully pull the caliper off like that. All right, now that you have the caliper off, you're going to kind of pull it through here. You might have to go between the wheel and the fork and then just pull that out of the way. Now we're going to remove the lever for the front brake. So you're going to take now your tri-Allen tool, find your 4mm side, and loosen these bolts up. And just remove this whole clamp. And now your brake is off the bike. All right, we're going to reinstall the front brake. If you got a new brake and you also got a rear one, the front brake is going to be obviously the shorter hose. So you're going to look at them. If you do compare them, it's going to be the one with the shorter hose. Also, there might be a brake block, is what we call, like a piece in here. I suggest just to keep that in there for right now. In case you accidentally squeeze the brake, we don't want you squeezing the lever, especially if this piece is out, because then it's going to basically push the pistons in, and if there's nothing in between there, it can close them up. And then you might have to get a screwdriver or something to wedge back in there to spread the pistons back open. So just keep that in there. If you do, it comes with that. And now we're going to put this on. All right, we're going to start with installing the lever. So you're going to take your Allen wrench and the 4mm side, remove the bolts on the clamp here. All right, and you're going to take the lever, you're going to put it right onto the handlebar like this. Take the clamp and by hand put the bolts into the lever, and then start tightening with your 4mm side of your Allen wrench. Make sure too that the clamp is pretty even on both sides. You don't want to just pinch on one side, so you want actually both of these. There's going to be a little bit of a gap here. You want them kind of even. Tighten down the clamp. You can set it the way you want right now, or you can wait till later. Just set it to the position you want. And then after that, we're going to you're going to take your harness here, and you're going to find, you should have, if you have these type of connections, you're going to find a red one here and here, and you're going to line these up. There should be also 2 little arrows. You can see right here, it's kind of hard to see them, but they're there. Press those together. All right, if you have this style connectors, you're going to match them up. They have a little bit of flat spot right there, so you're going to match this up, get them together, and then you're going to screw them together like this. Make sure they're nice and tight, and that should be all connected. Now we're going to install the caliper. If everything's kind of twisted or anything like that, you want to make sure you untwist any of the hose here. Make sure it kind of just naturally comes down. We don't want any kinks or anything on there, so do that. What we can do now is just take this off here. So if you have this in between here, this little plastic block, you're gonna pull that out. And then we're gonna put this caliper right in between here. And we don't want it, you could also put it on the outside like this, but you really don't want your hose on the outside here, because in case you drop the bike, falls down or something like that, you can actually kind of crush the hose. So we tend to like putting it behind here. So it's going to kind of wrap itself over on the inside like this. So now that you have a caliper here, you're going to also have the adapter, and you're going to have the long end and the short end. And so the long end here, as you see, there's a little bit longer piece here. That piece is going to be on the top here, and your caliper is going to go in like this. The hose is going to come out from the top, and this is going to be like this. And also you do have 2 different size bolts. The top one's going to be the little bit longer bolt, but it goes with this longer piece right here, the shorter one on the bottom. You also may note that you have a couple of these little spacers. You might come with those. If your bike previously had the spacers in between the caliper and they'll be between the caliper and the adapter, you want to keep those spacers in between there. If it didn't have them in between before, then you can put the spacers on the top. These spacers help depending on what adapter you have. You might need to use those, because if you don't, the top of your rotor is going to be hitting into the caliper itself, so this will space it out a little higher just to keep it from that happening. But do kind of note when you did take off your previous one that if it did have a spacer on the in between or on the top, so we want to keep it the same. So we're going to put the caliper onto the post mounts here on the fork. We're going to take the adapter. This one had a spacer in between, so we're going to take the longer bolt here, put it through, and then make sure that the brake pads slide between the rotor itself. And then you can just by hand start to tighten this down, kind of get the first few threads in there. Then you can take, I like taking this Allen wrench, but also you can take your regular Allen wrench too. You're going to take the 5mm side and you're going to tighten it up a little bit. Just make sure that it does go, that the threads are catching properly. If it's kind of giving you a little bit of resistance, you might want to pull it back out again and try again. We don't want to cross thread in here because then basically you might have to replace the whole fork if you do that. So make sure everything is going in there nice and easy. It should not give you too much resistance. We got that just in there enough. We're going to put the spacer in between here for the bottom part. And again, by hand, if you can get it started by hand, then get your Allen wrench and start to tighten it. This is why sometimes this will start hitting here. Takes a few more turns. That's why I like using this. I get it tighter a little faster. And we're just gonna get it just to a point where you still want to kind of slide this back and forth because we're gonna have to adjust it. So now this is just loose enough to slide back and forth. We're gonna end up adjusting this. So what you're gonna do is actually pull on the brake lever itself, and while you're pulling on the brake lever, it's going to actually clamp down onto the rotor, and it'll help center it and then tighten these down. You want them pretty snug. You don't want to overdo it, but do definitely want this pretty snug. There. Now, you might have to loosen one up or the other if you find that the rotor is dragging on one side, one pad or the other. So if you want to, you find that happening, you might just have to loosen it up a little bit and then slide the caliper back and forth a little bit one way or the other, just tiny bits though, and then tighten back down again. But now the caliper is on there. Now that you have the caliper on, you're going to take the hose and find your guide right here, your cable guide, your hose guide on the fork. Get it in between this little, should be a little slot right in there, and then take your 3mm Allen, tighten it down. Maybe even kind of pull the hose a little bit while you're tightening it. So you don't want too much slack here, so you don't want it hitting the spokes. All right. Another thing you can do also, if you find this is kind of coming out here, we don't want the tire or the spokes hitting this, you can pull up on here. You can actually take a zip tie and then just right below this guide, put a zip tie on there. Put the zip tie on and cut the excess, and this will keep the hose from kind of popping out here inadvertently and rubbing on your tire or your rim. And I tend to like, on my own bikes, I tend to like doing that. Just it's a nice precaution from keeping the hose getting damaged. Lift the front wheel. See, this one's dragging a little bit, so you can hear it dragging. We might have to do a readjustment, but if you lift that front wheel out, you can kind of double check, see that it's, see if it's centered. Also, press on the brake itself, on the lever, making sure that's stopping the bike, it's locking it up. And we're going to start with removing the rear brake now. If there is any cable management, make sure to remove that. and find the connection that goes to the brake here. This is your motor cutoff sensor, and I'm going to grab both ends and pull apart and disconnect that. If you have this style of connector with the screw in, you're going to unscrew this, unscrew it all the way, and pull it apart. All right, now we're going to remove this rubber channel here. You can try to kind of pull it with your fingers or pry it up here on top, but I suggest this is where you can use your needle nose pliers. Carefully grab it and start to pull. And when you get enough of it, you can start pulling it down by hand. There you go. Now the rubber channel is removed. You can find all your cables here. And we're going to be looking for, this would be the hose for your brake, rear brake. So you're going to probably need to pull that all this pretty much out. And then we're going to start to cut all the zip ties also that are holding the hose onto the bike. Now we're going to cut these zip ties here that are holding the brake hose, and also it's going to be holding some of the other, like your motor, also your motor cable. We're going to be cutting all these off so we can get to the brake hose. So you're going to use your scissors or side cutters. Be careful not to cut into any of the cables. And we're going to remove these zip ties. All right, I'm going to cut this zip tie right here. Quite a bit of our bikes will have this cable management here, and then also up top here. You're also going to have, on this day, you might have some cable management here too, so you probably have a zip tie there. So you're going to get up in there and try to cut it. Whatever is the easiest way to get into this. There. And now, make sure your cable's not hooked to anything, and now it's all loose, and now we can move on to removing the caliper itself. Now we're going to remove the caliper. You could remove these two bolts right here and remove this part of the caliper, leaving the adapter, but if you do have an adapter or you're getting a new adapter, I think it's just easier to remove these two bolts, and we can pull the whole caliper with the adapter off. So you're going to find the 5mm side of your tri-Allen tool and just remove these two bolts. So 1, 2. Be careful with your hand. You don't want to cut yourself on the rotor itself. Plus, you don't want to really be touching the rotor. You don't want to get any kind of grease or any kind of film or anything onto the rotor. So now we're just going to pull the caliper off. All right, now that you get the caliper off and the adapter, fish it through the frame here carefully, and then kind of get it in between best you can. Just get it down on the ground, and then we're going to go up to the lever and remove the lever also. All right, now you're going to take your tri-Allen tool, find the 4mm side. And we're going to take the brake lever off. So we'll loosen these bolts on the clamp and remove them. You're going to take it off, and then just make sure you get it through any wires, any of the cables here. You might have to go through some of these cables. And now your brake is off the bike. All right, we're going to now put on the rear brake. Usually this might come as, like if you get a new brake, it might be zip tied out. You're going to cut the little zip ties. When you unravel this, what I recommend doing is making sure everything, like there's no twist or anything in there. We want it kind of to go the way it naturally would want to go, the hose. So we're going to start it that way. I might actually put it over here on the other side, and then we're going to install the lever. Now we're going to install the lever, gonna take the 4mm side, unscrew these bolts right here. Put it onto the handlebar where the previous lever was. Get the bolts, screw them in by hand. All right, now you're going to tighten down the lever with the 4mm side, making sure everything's even, putting the lever where you'd like it, tighten everything down. Careful not to squeeze the brake. If you do have that little block, there's like a little plastic block on the caliper still, then it's okay to squeeze it, but I'd recommend not squeezing anything until we get the caliper on. Now we're gonna reconnect the motor cutoff sensors from the brake. So find on your wire harness, you should have another red tip connection here. Line up the little arrows, press them together like that. If you have this style of a connector, you're gonna put these back together. You're gonna look for like kind of the flat edge there, line those up, screw these together. And that should do it. All right, now we're gonna install the caliper onto the bike. What you're gonna do is try to get the caliper in between here, the wheel and the frame. You're gonna bring it up this way. Kind of just pay attention to make sure that the cables there's no kinks or anything on the cable. And then if you do have this little plastic block here, it's a good time to take it off. We're gonna place the rotor in between the pads. So you're gonna slip the caliper over the rotor like this. And take one of your bolts here, thread it onto the adapter, take the second bolt, line it up, thread it onto there. Then take the 5mm side of your tri-Allen wrench, tighten these bolts down. Definitely want to make sure these are pretty snug. So, double check them, make sure they're snug. Now, if you need to readjust this, you can loosen these up a little bit. These two bolts right here, just make them just loose enough so that the caliper can move freely side to side. And then what you're gonna do is you can squeeze on the brake, on that rear brake there. And while you're squeezing, you can center the brake, or you can have a friend squeeze it while you're working down here. And that can help center the brake. So while they're squeezing on it, tighten it down. Tighten it pretty snug. And kind of tip the bike over. Make sure that's spinning pretty freely and not rubbing on anything. And if it isn't, great. If it's still rubbing a little bit, you might have to loosen it up again and loosen and just move it a little bit one way or the other, whatever. Just you can kind of look down on it and see what side it's dragging on. Loosen it, tighten it again. Might take a couple of tries to get it to center right, but there. Just also be careful, a little bit careful when you do spin that this isn't catching. So just spin it lightly like that. Now we're gonna zip tie everything onto the frame here, onto the guides. So just be aware of all the guide points that you have. So most of our bikes are gonna have one up here on top, just like this bike here. So you get the zip ties in. You want them not too tight. We want this still to move a little bit. because before we cut these, we might need to readjust or move it a little bit. So we just want it just loose enough still to be able to move it. So. Put that in there, you can still move it. Now, also you might have a motor cable, depending on what bike you have, that's also going to be coming in here. So you're going to make sure you also get the motor cable together. So you get the motor cable together with your brake cable or your brake hose. There we go. So everything's still able to move. All right. Now they have these in here. I wouldn't cut them yet. They're still still got some room to move these, and then we're gonna end up just tucking everything into the channel there. And then once we get all that tucked in and the channel put back on and everything seems like it's in place, then we'll go ahead and tighten these just a little bit more and cut the excess off. All right, we're gonna put this channel cover back on, but before we do that, I'm gonna kind of tuck all your cables in. So you wanna keep them kind of already in there. So get them in as best as you can, kind of already into here. And after you get that done, this is when we use the alcohol. So the best way to get these channels on, these rubber pieces on, is to spray a little bit of alcohol carefully. Just if you can get it into the channel, or if you don't have a spray bottle, just pour a little bit on. The good thing about this is it helps lubricate it to kind of get into the channel better, but also it'll dry right out when you're done with it. So you're gonna take it, get it into the channel there, push it up as best you can. And you get towards the top, make sure the cables are out of the way. There's a little bit more of an opening here, so you want to make sure they're out of the way. There it is. It's all the way in. Okay, now you can take a rag if you want, just wipe off the excess. All right, now that you have the rubber channel in, everything looks like it's in place. Now you can tighten these zip ties a little bit. We don't want to over tighten them. We don't want it pinching anything, just so that they're snug. And still, you can have a little bit of movement. And make sure just to cut off your excess. All right. Now we're going to go over towards the handlebar, and then we're going to put on your cable management that's up there, and then you should be good to go. All right, so now that you have everything connected, we're going to double check, make sure you have the brake levers where you want them. Double check them, make sure that they're tight on the bars. Also just check to make sure there's pressure. They're locking the brakes up. And then now you can take your cable management guides. If you got these little noodle pieces, or sometimes you can just use even zip ties to do this. You're gonna just reinstall these in there. There, Marty's. Might even have one down here. And put the last one on. There. Make sure the guides are on there good. Double check the brake levers, make sure they're on there tight. And you should be all ready to go. One reminder, double check to make sure, now is a good time, double check to make sure everything's all centered, tight. Again, just double check, make sure there's no cables or anything that are in the way of the wheels or anything like that. Then you should be good to ride. All right, now that your brakes are all installed, satisfactory, take your battery, turn your battery on, put it onto the bike, and we're going to turn the bike on. And we're going to do a double check just to make sure that your brake cutoff sensors are connected properly and that they are working. So you do this, you put the brake on. I'm actually using the throttle, nothing's happening. I got the bike carefully, I got the bike tipped over here on the kickstand. Nothing happening, let go of the brake. Now the bike turns on. Go with the other brake here now. I have the rear brake activated. Not getting anything. Now the brake is off and now the motor works. So now that we know that the brake sensors, both brakes on, no throttle, so both brake sensors are working properly, and we just want to make sure of that before we go out and ride. You don't want the sensor sticking or not working. So if they don't work, then we do have we have videos that also show you how to readjust these. All right, now that you're ready to go, before you take the bike out, just remember that you do have to bed the brakes in. We do have a video that tells you how to do that. And once you bed the brakes in, you should be all good to go. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, contact customer support, and happy riding.